Al Pacino isn't just an ordinary actor. He is a legend, one of the most talented performers ever to grace our screens. But even legends have their own icons.
Closest that I've ever seen to a genius, acting genius.
Despite building a career filled with unforgettable roles, Pacino has always been open about the actors he looks up to, the ones whose talent struck him so deeply that they became his all-time favorites. For him, these figures weren't just entertainers, they were masters who shaped the art of acting and left a lasting impression on him. These are Al Pacino's 7 favorite actors of all time. Starting at number 7, we have Julie Christie.
Except to thank everyone concerned, and especially my darling John Schlesinger.
When Al Pacino talks about actors he admires, Julie Christie sits right at the very top of his list. Back in 1979, in an interview, Pacino called her just about my favorite actress in the world. And he didn't stop there, he went further, describing her as the most poetic of all the actresses. That's no small compliment, especially coming from a man who shared the screen and stage with some of the greatest talents of all time. When Pacino says something like that, you know he means it. For Pacino, Christie wasn't just another big star from the golden days of cinema. She represented something deeper, an artist who seemed to carry a compelling presence into every performance. He was captivated by the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she could turn even the smallest gestures into something meaningful. To him,
the Khmer Rouge, if anybody remembers Pol Pot, who they were,
it wasn't just acting, it was poetry in motion. That's the kind of effect Christie had on people who truly understood the craft. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. Julie Christie defined an entire era of film with roles in Darling, Dr. Zhivago, Far from the Madding Crowd, and later the haunting Don't Look Now. She could be glamorous one moment and deeply vulnerable the next. That rare combination made her stand out in a way that very few actresses ever could. When Pacino called her poetic, he wasn't exaggerating. Christie had that unique spark that could lift a story off the page and make it feel alive in a way that lingered long after the credits rolled. What's especially interesting is that Pacino himself, even as he was carving out his own legendary status with The Godfather and Serpico, still looked to Christie as a source of inspiration. That tells you a lot about the kind of respect she commanded within the industry. To Pacino, she wasn't just an actress who played parts, she was an artist who transformed them, someone who reminded him of the true beauty of cinema. So while Pacino became one of the greatest actors of all time, it's telling that he still looked up to Julie Christie as one of the finest to ever do it. In his eyes, she wasn't just a performer, she was the embodiment of artistry, honesty, and inspiration. Moving on, let's have a look at number 6, John Cazale.
John was the actor who became who he was playing.
Some actors make an impression, and then some actors change your life. For Al Pacino, John Cazale was the latter. They met long before Hollywood knew their names, hustling on stage in New York, just 2 young guys chasing the dream. And what Pacino saw in Cazale left a mark that never faded. Years later, when Pacino looked back, he said something remarkable. "I learned more about acting from John than anybody." That's not just casual praise, that's deep respect. The kind of thing you say about someone who completely reshaped the way you see your craft. Cazale's career may have been tragically short, but it was nothing less than extraordinary. In just 5 films, The Godfather, The Conversation, Dog Day Afternoon, The Godfather Part 2, and The Deer Hunter, he left behind a trail of work that most actors couldn't match. Every single one of those movies was nominated for Best Picture. That's unheard of. And in 2 of them, he stood right beside Pacino, creating on-screen chemistry that felt raw and real because it came from something genuine, a deep friendship, and a shared dedication to telling the truth through acting.
He was my acting partner. He was like my older brother, too.
What made it even more powerful for Pacino was how personal their connection became. He often described Cazale as inspiring, not in the loud or flashy sense, but in the quiet way he carried himself. Cazale showed him the beauty of subtlety, the power in doing less, in letting honesty do the work. Off-screen, he wasn't the type to dominate a room, but rather someone who listened, who thought deeply before he spoke, and who carried wisdom in silence. Pacino soaked that in. For him, watching Cazale perform wasn't just watching a co-star. It was like being in the presence of a teacher.
The person with the head on their shoulders, the go-to person.
And then there was the heartbreak. When Cazale was diagnosed with cancer, Pacino stayed by his side, refusing to let him face it alone. Losing him at just 42 years old devastated Pacino, but it also carved Cazale's place into his heart forever. Even decades later, whenever Pacino talks about the greatest actors he's ever known, Cazale's name rises to the top not with the detached respect of a colleague, but with the love of family. For Pacino, John Cazale wasn't just part of his career, he was part of his history. At number 5, we have Gary Cooper.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to see that they're giving this to a man who is...
Al Pacino has never hidden his admiration for the greats who came before him, and one name he always holds in high regard is Gary Cooper. Pacino once described him as a kind of phenomenon, his ability to take something and elevate it, give it such dignity. That's a powerful statement, especially considering they came from completely different generations. Cooper's prime was in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, long before Pacino ever set foot on a movie set. Yet, despite the years between them, Pacino felt connected to what Cooper represented. Gary Cooper was the embodiment of old Hollywood quiet strength, effortless charm, and a natural honesty that audiences trusted the moment he appeared on screen. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't need to be. Films like High Noon, Sergeant York, and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town didn't just make him a star, they turned him into a symbol of integrity and decency.
You know, so they were, because there were all kinds of people.
He became the kind of actor who didn't just play heroes, he defined what a hero was supposed to look like. Pacino recognized that rare quality. To him, Cooper wasn't just acting, he was living truthfully in front of the camera. What fascinated Pacino even more was the way Cooper achieved this. He didn't rely on theatrics or overexpression. His power came from simplicity. A single look, a pause, or a moment of silence could speak louder than dialogue. Pacino, who built his career on intensity, fire, and emotional outbursts, saw in Cooper a completely different approach: restraint, elegance, and understatement. And that contrast made Cooper even more magnetic in Pacino's eyes. Pacino often spoke about how Cooper could say more with silence than most actors could with a page of dialogue. That's what stayed with him, the reminder that acting isn't always about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing less and letting the truth of the character shine through. Cooper had that gift. He could make you feel something profound without ever raising his voice or breaking a sweat. In Pacino's world of larger-than-life performances, Gary Cooper stood as a timeless example that grace and dignity could be just as powerful as intensity and passion. To Pacino, Cooper wasn't just a star from the past, he was living proof that true talent, the kind that touches people on a human level, never fades with time. Moving on to number 4, we have Robert De Niro.
Don't have time to think, so you're forced to say, look, I'll just enjoy it, go with it.
Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, two names that will forever be linked in movie history. What's funny is, for years, people couldn't help but compare them. Same era, same gritty New York energy, both redefining what acting could be in the 1970s. Most actors would have turned that into a rivalry, but Pacino? He never saw it that way. For him, De Niro wasn't competition, he was someone to admire. And eventually, a friend for life.
But we could have.
Pacino has called De Niro one of the finest actors he's ever known. He talks about De Niro's discipline, his obsessive commitment to detail, and his fearlessness when it came to disappearing completely into a role. Pacino has this volcanic energy, this fire that explodes on screen. De Niro, on the other hand, is colder, more methodical, almost surgical in the way he builds a character. And Pacino loved that. He respected the differences, seeing them not as a threat, but as inspiration.
And we were really into it. We were going to do it. Other things, too. 1900, too.
What makes their story even better is the friendship that grew alongside the admiration. They weren't calling each other every day, but there was always this quiet bond, a mutual understanding between two men who knew exactly what it took to survive in their world. They kept track of each other's work, cheering one another on from the sidelines even before they ever shared a scene. The world had to wait until 1995 to see them finally go head-to-head in Heat. And when it happened, it was magic. That diner scene? Pure electricity. Two legends sitting across from each other, feeding off one another with total trust.
But that's what it is. But not a rivalry, it's just the normal.
We sort of grew up together.
Yeah.
Pacino later admitted that going face-to-face with De Niro wasn't about trying to outshine him. It was about giving each other room to be brilliant. That's what real respect looks like. And decades later, when they reunited for The Irishman, it felt like coming full circle. Older, wiser, and still at the very top of their game, they carried with them decades of history both on screen and off. Pacino has said more than once that De Niro isn't just a colleague, he's family. And you can feel that in the way they speak about each other. Their bond goes beyond Hollywood. It's respect, it's loyalty. It's two legends who know exactly what they mean to each other and to the art of acting itself. At number 3, we have Dustin Hoffman.
The front of the Arts and Leisure section, still from the...
When people bring up Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman, there's always this joke that they've been mistaken for each other for decades. Same height, same dark hair back in the day, both coming out of that gritty New York acting scene. People would mix them up all the time. and they both laughed about it. But behind the confusion, there's always been something stronger: mutual respect. Pacino has never hidden how much he admires Hoffman. What he really loved about him was how Hoffman came into Hollywood and completely changed the game. Back then, leading men were expected to look a certain way: tall, polished, movie star handsome. Hoffman didn't fit that category at all. But when The Graduate hit in 1967, everything shifted. Suddenly, the unlikely actor was the biggest name in the country. For Pacino, who was still struggling to get noticed at the time, that was huge. If Hoffman could break through, it meant there was room for him too.
And I thought it was very good, but, I didn't know
What impressed Pacino most was Hoffman's honesty on screen. He wasn't trying to be glamorous. He wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. He just told the truth through his characters. Every role he took on, whether it was Midnight Cowboy, Kramer vs. Kramer, or Tootsie, felt alive. Pacino admired that. He often said Hoffman had this way of making even the smallest, quietest roles feel important, like every detail mattered. The two of them couldn't have been more different in style, and that's what made the admiration so real. Pacino was known for his intensity, that fiery energy that could fill a room. Hoffman, on the other hand, was precise and subtle, letting small gestures do the talking. Pacino loved that contrast. It proved there wasn't just one way to be great. And even though people constantly compared them, Pacino never saw Hoffman as a rival. He saw him as a kind of inspiration, a fellow actor who carved his own path and showed what was possible. They are professional acquaintances more than close friends, but they are always linked, whether they like it or not. For Pacino, Dustin Hoffman wasn't just another name from his generation. He was someone who pushed boundaries, someone who proved that talent and truth could break every Hollywood rule, and in Pacino's eyes, that made him one of the finest actors to ever do it. At number 2, we have Martin Sheen.
5 or 6, and gradually it dawned on me that I was like...
When Al Pacino talks about the actors who shaped him, the name Martin Sheen often comes up, and not just as a colleague, but as a true brother. Their bond started long before the world knew either of them. Back in the 1960s, both were unknown kids grinding it out in New York, desperate for a shot at the stage.
Was with an actor named Martin Sheen.
They weren't living the glamorous life of movie stars. They were roommates in a tiny place on Cornelia Street, splitting rent, working odd jobs, and, as Pacino later joked, even cleaning toilets just to keep themselves afloat. That kind of struggle forges a friendship you never forget. It was at the Herbert Berghoff studio where they both sharpened their craft, a place buzzing with young hopefuls. But even in that crowd, Pacino saw something rare in Sheen. He later called him the second coming of James Dean, which wasn't just flattery.
I love him so much.
Why is he important in your life?
Pacino meant that Sheen carried the same raw, restless energy Dean had, a vulnerability mixed with defiance that made you sit up and pay attention. For someone like Pacino, who revered Dean, recognizing the quality in Sheen was like finding a kindred spirit. Their lives didn't instantly turn into Hollywood fairy tales. Both men had to grind through rejection, poverty, and years of anonymity before the breaks finally came. Pacino would go on to explode with The Godfather, while Sheen's defining moment arrived in Apocalypse Now.
Teenagers together, we met in Manhattan.
Yet despite the different paths their careers took, that early connection bound them. They weren't just actors chasing fame. They were two young men learning how to survive, leaning on each other in a city that didn't care whether they made it or not. What makes their story so special is how Pacino never downplays that period. Even decades later, when he could talk endlessly about Oscars, box office hits, or Hollywood legends, he still brings up Martin Sheen as one of the greats he knew before the world did. There's a kind of pride in his voice, almost like he's saying, "I knew this guy was special before anybody else did." And that pride comes not from competition, but from respect. For Pacino, Sheen wasn't just a fellow actor, he was family. Their friendship grew out of hardship, sustained by admiration, and survived the chaos of fame. In remembering those years, Pacino reminds us that greatness isn't just about the roles you play. Sometimes it's about the people who walk beside you when no one else is watching. Finally, at number 1, we have Marlon Brando. For Al Pacino, Marlon Brando was the actor who changed everything. By the time Pacino was hustling for roles in New York, Brando had already turned Hollywood upside down. His performances in A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront weren't just good, they were revolutionary. Brando didn't act the way actors were supposed to. He didn't deliver lines like he was on stage at the opera. He mumbled, he slouched, he scratched his head mid-sentence, and somehow it felt more real than anything people had ever seen. For a young Pacino, watching this unfold was like seeing someone tear down the walls of tradition and say, This is how it's really done.
So he had acquired all that stuff inside him.
Pacino has often admitted that Brando was the one who opened the doors for every actor who followed. Before Brando, movie stars were polished, almost untouchable, perfect hair, perfect diction, perfect posture. Then Brando appeared, messy and raw, but impossibly magnetic. He spoke the way real people spoke, full of hesitation, silence, and emotion that couldn't be contained by neat delivery. That kind of honesty electrified the screen. Pacino once explained that watching Brando made him realize acting didn't have to look like acting, it could feel like truth. And that idea shaped his entire career.
The language and everything that goes with the emotions, it was inside him.
Their connection reached a new dimension during the filming of The Godfather. Pacino, still relatively unknown, had been cast as Michael Corleone, the role that would define his life. Brando, already a titan, was playing Don Vito Corleone. For Pacino, walking onto that set wasn't just nerve-wracking, it was surreal. He was about to share scenes with the man who had set the standard for everything he believed acting should be. Later, he would describe it as both intimidating and exhilarating. Every day felt like being in the most extraordinary acting workshop imaginable. What struck Pacino most was Brando's restraint. Brando didn't need to shout or gesticulate wildly to dominate a scene. He could tilt his head, pause for a second, or let his voice drop to a whisper, and suddenly the entire room was hanging on his every move. That ability to hold power without forcing it fascinated Pacino, and it taught him a lesson he carried into his own performances. Less is often more. But beyond craft, what Pacino admired deeply was Brando's independence. Brando never played the Hollywood game the way studios wanted him to. He clashed with producers, turned down roles, and often chose to disappear when he felt like it. To the industry, that made him unpredictable, even difficult. To Pacino, it made him principled. Brando cared about truth more than stardom, about the work more than the spotlight. That kind of defiance, that refusal to be molded into something safe and marketable, was something Pacino respected deeply. Even decades later, Pacino still speaks about Brando with reverence. He doesn't just call him a great actor, he calls him the actor who permitted every performer after him to be bold, to take risks, to be human on screen. For Pacino, working with Brando wasn't just a career milestone, it was the fulfillment of a dream. It was the chance to stand alongside the very man who had lit the spark in him years before, and to carry forward that same spirit of fearless honesty into his own work.